Now, confirmands, you all have already given us a lot to think about this morning, so I'm going to keep this short. But I wanted to tell you a story. So when I was 16, I spent a couple weeks at a summer camp working in the kitchen, and it was an amazing couple weeks. I made friends, and we asked a lot of big questions about God, similar to the questions you all have been talking about in confirmation this year, like how do we make sense of God in science, or why are bad things happening in the world if God is so great? And we had gotten really close, and it was the last night of camp, and I was not looking forward to leaving and going back home. And we were sitting around a campfire, and one of the counselors kind of gathered us in, and he said, I've been thinking about this campfire. It burns strong and beautiful for a while, but like every fire, after a while it begins to die down. And now we're starting to be left with only some coals. So you can try and blow on the coals. That'll make another flame pop up for a moment, but then after another minute or two, that's going to die back down again. And if you want to keep the fire going, the only way to do it is to go get more wood, more fuel for the fire. And he said our faith is kind of like this. There are moments where we feel very close to God, where we've learned a lot, where we've had a great time at camp, or learned a lot in confirmation class, and we are confident and strong in our faith, and we feel God's presence, and that's when the fire is burning strong. But eventually, it starts to die down at some point. And we can try and blow on the old coals, the things that used to help us understand God or meet God, but eventually, that's not going to work, and we need to get more wood for the fire to keep growing in our faith. And that's something I've thought a lot about over the years as I've gone through different phases in my faith. In high school, the idea that God accepted me even when I felt all the pressure of school and academics and sports and friends and everything, that idea that God accepted me and that God's grace was sufficient, that was really meaningful. But then at some point, it just wasn't anymore, because I found myself in a place where I didn't even know if I believed in God anymore. And so for a time, what was really meaningful in my faith was the idea that Jesus also questioned God. As Kaylee mentioned in her statement of faith, that Jesus said, Father, take this cup from me, if you will. That even on the cross, Jesus said, my God, why have you forsaken me? And I leaned on that knowledge that I was close to Jesus even when I felt far away. And then I'm going to confess that every week when I see the headlines on Sunday morning, I'm starting to be in another one of those places. Another act of violence in a place of worship again this weekend. And it seems like it's happening all the time. And so when I see all the injustice and all the hatred in the world, I turn to the Old Testament prophets now, where they are calling for God's justice and talking about how God is angry with injustice and oppression and wants to bring a world of peace. And that's what I'm leaning on right now. And all of this is a way of saying that every time that it's felt like my faith is a dying ember, God provides more wood for the fire. So I think this story about Thomas is actually a good example of someone who knew when to reach for more, what he needed to keep growing in his faith. Now, he gets a bad rap. Sometimes he's called Doubting Thomas and all that, but I don't think it's his fault that he wasn't there the first time Jesus showed up. I mean, they were all locked in a room, scared, and he was still out in the world. So I got to wonder, was he still out there doing the good work that Jesus had called him to do? I don't know, but he wasn't there, and so it's understandable that he asked the disciples for more proof. He said, unless I see the nails in his hands and put my hand in his side, I will not believe. And maybe it wasn't doubt as much as reaching out for that thing that he knew he needed to keep growing in his walk as a disciple. And I love that Jesus doesn't criticize him for needing that. He just says, see my hand, put your finger here, and offers him what he needs. But what I noticed reading this story again this week is that it's not just Jesus who welcomes him and accepts him, even with his doubts. It's also the disciples. I mean, they could have thrown him out or asked him to recant his words or asked him to stop calling himself a disciple of Jesus if he was going to question this, but they just let him keep hanging out with them, or at least it seems that way, because he was there with them the next week when Jesus did show up. And it's because they let him remain there, even in his doubt, that he was able to meet Jesus in a new way. So, Ian and Kaylee and Adam and Emma and Nicholas, you all have worked really hard in confirmation this year. You've gotten up very early on Sunday mornings and been up in the tower room, and I've noticed that you've eaten a lot of donuts and cookies and whatever it took to keep you awake in early mornings discussing the Trinity. And today you've all written statements of faith that reflect what's important to you about your faith today. And I hope that you will hold on to those things. But I also know that it might be next week or next month or next year that you'll look back at today or what you wrote and it will seem hollow or naive or might just not seem like you anymore. And that's okay. If there's one thing I want you to hear today, it's that God walks alongside us through all the twists and turns of our faith and our life. And Jesus can meet you in new ways when you need new ways of meeting him. And I think we all need to hear that. So at some point in life, you will come to your moment of unless. For Thomas, it was, unless I see the nails in his hand and put my hand in his side, I will not believe. I don't know what your unless will be. Unless you heal my relative who's sick, I won't believe. Unless you give me a sign, I won't believe. Unless you end this injustice and discrimination that I see in the world, I won't believe. You might have your heart broken, or you might experience a new understanding of science or a new culture, or you might hear a story about how a church has treated a friend of yours, and you'll wonder if you want to be a part of this faith anymore. And when you get to that point, that's okay. That's normal. And I want you to do what Thomas did. Just say it out loud. Unless. Because when you say it out loud, you give your faith community the chance to welcome you anyway and to keep on growing with you. And you give God a chance to meet you in a new way. I think it's at the moment that we come to our unless that we're knocked off balance enough to realize that God might be bigger than we previously understood. So for Thomas, he learned that Jesus wasn't just a teacher and a friend and a healer, but that Jesus was God with power to come back from the dead. And did you notice that at the end of this story, Thomas wrote a new statement of faith? It's not a whole page long, and it doesn't include all the members of the Trinity, and he didn't reference a Bible verse, so he kind of got off easy. But it's pretty powerful. My Lord and my God. It reflects his understanding that Jesus is his Lord, the one he wants to follow, and his God, the one in whom he knows he can trust. And I think that's a statement of faith that we all can cling to through all the other twists and turns. So may Jesus, who is constant through all the journeys of our lives, be for all of us always our Lord and our God.